What if the quietest person in the room was actually the most dangerous? This isn't just a story about school bullies. It's about what happens when someone makes one very wrong assumption and finds out too late that the new girl wasn't helpless, she was highly trained. If you're ready for stories that fight back, subscribe and turn on notifications. The fog was still thick over Maplewood, Ohio, when 16-year-old Sienna Walker stepped through the tall brick doors of Lincoln High School. It was a Monday morning, and for most students, just another start to the week. But for Sienna, it was the beginning of her fourth new school in just under 3 years. Her hair was pulled into a plain ponytail. She wore faded jeans, sneakers, and a gray hoodie that hung just loosely enough to help her disappear into the crowd. That's exactly what she wanted, to be invisible. Her mother, a newly transferred ER physician at the local hospital, had begged her. "Let's just start fresh, sweetheart," she said as they unpacked boxes. "No more fighting, no more headlines, just be normal." And Sienna had promised, even though her instincts screamed otherwise. Because what no one at Lincoln High knew was that Sienna Walker wasn't just another quiet girl with a 1,000-yard stare. She was the reigning junior MMA champion of Michigan, a fighter trained at one of Detroit's most elite gyms. Her left hook had cracked ribs before. Her rear naked choke had ended matches in under 10 seconds. But here, none of that mattered. She was just the new girl from the city. She kept her head down, answered questions in class softly, and avoided eye contact in the hallways. But it didn't take long for predators to find prey. By lunch, she was sitting alone in the far corner of the cafeteria, quietly eating a sandwich, when a broad-shouldered boy with a football swagger dropped into the seat across from her. "You must be new," he said with a smirk. "Name's Brad Thompson, and you're sitting at my table." Sienna looked up. Her face was calm, almost blank. "Hi, I'm Sienna." Brad's smile widened, like he'd found his next game. He had no idea how badly that game would end. Brad leaned back of the chair like he owned the entire cafeteria. "Well, Sienna from Detroit," he said slowly, dragging out the syllables. "Around here, we've got a little system for new kids." Two other boys flanked him. One was short, with squinty eyes and a twitchy grin, Kyle. The other, tall and wiry with a smug expression, Jake. Together, they made up the kind of trio every school had, loud, entitled, and dangerous in numbers. "We don't like people showing up and thinking they're better than us," Brad continued, leaning closer. "Especially not people from cities that think they're too cool for small towns." Sienna didn't respond. She took another bite of her sandwich, chewed slowly, and kept her gaze steady. Kyle snickered. "She thinks she's better than us, all right." Jake reached across the table, snatching her water bottle. "Hey, say something, city girl." Sienna wiped her mouth with a napkin. "Nice to meet you all," she said calmly. "But I'm not looking for trouble." Brad's face darkened. "See, that sounds like disrespect. And around here, disrespect has a price. Call it a protection fee. $5 a day. That's cheap for peace of mind, don't you think?" Jake leaned closer, placing a hand firmly on her shoulder as she tried to stand. "Where are you going? We're not finished." Sienna's eyes flickered. Something shifted. Not fear, not panic, steel. "I said I don't want trouble," she repeated. Her voice was low now, controlled. "But if you force me to respond, you won't like how I do it." Brad let out a mocking laugh. "You threatening me? You don't even look like you could punch through a paper bag." "You've got until tomorrow to think it through," Kyle added. "And don't even bother crying to the teachers. Brad's dad basically funds half the sports program here." As the boys walked away, still laughing, Sienna remained seated, hands clenched under the table. She could have ended it right then. One strike, one takedown. But she'd promised her mother. Later that night, Sienna stared at the ceiling in her bedroom, fists tightening every time she replayed Brad's voice in her head. Back in Detroit, boys like him learned respect quickly. She didn't fight for attention, she fought to survive. And she'd promised herself, if anyone crossed that line again, she wouldn't let it slide. But here, she had to be normal. She had to pretend. Blend in. Still $5 a day? That was $150 a month. Over $1,000 for the school year. And it was never just about money. Brad was testing her limits, poking the cage to see if the quiet girl had teeth. She did. The next morning, she didn't speak to anyone. She just walked through the school halls like usual, silent and steady, until she reached the stairwell. Brad and his crew were waiting. He smiled as she approached. "So, have you thought about it?" Sienna stopped a step below him, looked him directly in the eye. "I'm not paying you." The smile slid from his face. "Excuse me?" "I said no." For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Brad laughed, but it was colder this time. "You want to play tough, huh? Okay, let's play." What followed was no game. Throughout the day, Sienna became the target. Her chemistry notes were knocked to the ground. Her shoulder was slammed into the wall between classes. Her name was whispered in mockery behind her back. But she never reacted. Not yet. It all came to a head in the cafeteria at lunch. Brad, backed by half the football team, approached her table. "She still thinks she's too good for our traditions," he said loudly, grabbing her lunch tray and dumping the contents into her lap. The crowd laughed. Sienna didn't. She just stood up, soaked and silent, looked Brad in the eye and said one sentence. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The cafeteria erupted in laughter as soup dripped from Sienna's jeans and splattered onto the floor. Brad smirked like a king on his throne, soaking in the attention. But then everything shifted. Sienna stood up slowly. Her sweatshirt clung to her legs, her lunch tray clattered to the floor. The room quieted just enough for her words to cut through. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Brad leaned forward, mocking. "Oh yeah? You gonna cry to the principal? Call your mommy?" Sienna didn't answer. She grabbed her backpack, turned around, and walked out of the cafeteria without a word. Some students laughed harder. Others stared, confused. Brad waved smugly at the crowd. "That's what happens when you disrespect the system." But deep down, a flicker of unease crept into his gut. In the girls' bathroom, Sienna stood at the sink trying to rinse off her jeans. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with something deeper, controlled rage. She took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the contact list for only a second before she tapped Coach Johnson. A gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Sienna?" "Yes, Coach, it's me." "How's the new school?" "I have a problem." There was a pause. "What kind of problem?" "The kind I used to solve in the cage." Another pause. "I see." She explained briefly. The threats, the extortion, the humiliation. When she finished, Coach Johnson's voice was calm but firm. "Look, your mom wanted a quiet start, but there's a difference between peace and surrender. If you let him push, he'll never stop. You know how to handle this. Just do it smart. Not in school, no audience, no lasting damage." "I understand." "And Sienna," he added, "if you do this, don't go halfway." That afternoon, Sienna stayed late in the library, pretending to work, but she was waiting. She knew Brad had soccer practice and usually left later than most students. At 4:15 p.m., the parking lot was nearly empty. She spotted him walking out of the gym, alone, earbuds in, backpack slung lazily over one shoulder. She stepped into his path. Brad blinked, then laughed. "Oh, look, it's Soup Girl, back for another bath?" "I want to end this," Sienna said flatly. And what? He grinned. Your pride? No, your game. Brad raised a brow. You're serious? One-on-one. Right now. If you win, I pay you double. If I win, you leave me alone, forever, and you apologize to the school tomorrow. Brad burst out laughing. You want to fight me? Do you have any idea who I am? I bench 300. I've been lifting since middle school. Sienna stared at him, unblinking. Then you've got nothing to worry about. Brad hesitated. There was something unnerving about how calm she was. Still, the thought of beating her in the empty parking lot, then bragging about it for weeks, was too tempting. All right then, anything goes. Deal. They moved to an open area near the rear parking lot. No cameras, no witnesses, just fading sunlight and cool autumn air. Brad took off his hoodie, revealing sculpted arms and a confident smirk. Sienna dropped her backpack, unzipped her hoodie, and stood in a fitted t-shirt, arms loose by her sides, breathing steady. Brad rolled his shoulders. Last chance to run. Let's get it over with. He charged. Fast, heavy, aggressive, aiming straight for her face with a wild right hook. It never landed. Sienna stepped left. Just a few inches, enough to make him miss completely. At the same time, her left arm snapped forward like a piston, slamming into his solar plexus. Brad's breath vanished instantly. He collapsed to his knees, choking, gasping, unable to breathe. Sienna circled slowly. That was 40%, she said quietly. You want to see 100? Brad couldn't answer. His face twisted in pain. Sienna crouched beside him. I didn't want this, she said. But you made the choice. You humiliated me, threatened me, thought I'd break. He looked up at her, dazed. I'm not broken, Brad, she whispered. I'm trained. She stood and walked away, leaving him curled on the pavement. Behind her, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows. And just like that, the predator had become the warning story. By the time Sienna Walker walked through the front doors of Lincoln High the next morning, the rumors had already spread like wildfire. Brad got beat up? By her? The new girl? No way. That can't be real. But when Brad Thompson entered the hallway just before first period, the truth became undeniable. His posture wasn't the same. His usual swagger had vanished. One hand pressed gently against his ribs beneath his hoodie. His eyes searched the crowd, not with dominance, but with hesitation. Then he spotted her. Sienna was by her locker, calm, composed, silent as always. For a long moment, the hallway watched in breathless anticipation as Brad walked toward her. Students turned, phones tilted. Teachers peered out of classrooms. When he reached her, Brad didn't raise his voice. He didn't smirk. He simply stopped, looked at her, and said clearly, Sienna, I'm sorry. What I did was wrong. I was a jerk. I embarrassed you in front of everyone, and you didn't deserve that. Gasps echoed. Mouths dropped. There was no sarcasm in his voice, just regret. Sienna gave a small nod. Thank you, she said quietly. Brad turned, looked at the rest of the students watching, and added, I owe all of you an apology too. Don't follow my example. I acted like a bully, and I got exactly what I deserved. No one laughed. No one mocked him, because deep down, they all knew something had changed. From that day on, Brad and his friends left Sienna, and everyone else, completely alone. In fact, they seemed to become quieter, more aware, even protective. But Sienna knew it wasn't over yet. It was only the beginning. The weeks that followed moved differently. Sienna was no longer the silent girl in the back row. Students nodded when she passed in the hallway. Some whispered her name with a new kind of respect. Others, especially the quiet ones, the ones who usually kept their heads down, started sitting closer to her in class, seeking quiet strength. She didn't brag. She didn't retell what happened. She didn't need to, because the school told it for her. Brad never mentioned the fight again, but he kept his word. He apologized to the faculty, the cafeteria staff, even the younger students he'd bullied before. Something in him had cracked open, and for once, humility had taken root. One afternoon, as Sienna walked past the trophy case near the school's front office, she noticed something new, a small handwritten quote taped gently to the glass. "Power isn't in how loud you speak. It's in knowing when to act. And why." Anonymous student. Sienna smiled. She knew who had written it. Grace, a quiet sophomore who had once been Brad's favorite target. Now she walked taller, spoke louder. And Sienna? She didn't want to lead a revolution. She just wanted to feel safe being herself. But sometimes, just by standing up once, especially when it's hardest, you give others the courage to stand too. And that's what she'd done. She hadn't just defended herself, she'd shifted the rules, changed the atmosphere, rewritten what strength looked like at Lincoln High. Because true power doesn't come from fists or fear. It comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone else define it. And for the first time in a long time, Sienna Walker felt free.